Good evening and welcome to another edition of Inside the Issues, sponsored by the League of Women Voters Richfield. My name is Maureen Scalia and I serve as your moderator on these programs. This evening I'm very happy to have with me three wonderful women representing or working for Cornerstone. For those that might not know about Cornerstone, Cornerstone is about 30 years old and has been serving women, children, some men, in the areas of domestic violence, sexual violence, and also educating kids, people, police, you name it, on those issues. So on my immediate right is Colleen Smith, your Director of Programs.
Correct, thank you.
And then in the center is Meg Schnabel, and she's the Executive Director, so you run the whole thing, right? Pretty much. And then to the far, my left is Cheryl Kobe-Untanen. Yes. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. And she is the director, Program Manager.
Yes.
Welcome to the show, and thank you. I'm sure you
thanks for having us.
Time out of a very busy life that you have. Colleen, should we start with you? Tell us a little about yourself and how you ended up at Cornerstone, maybe, or?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you. I actually got into this work over 35 years ago. I was a victim of domestic violence and sexual assault. At that time, I was living in southern Minnesota, and it was a period where shelters and services were just beginning. I relocated to the Twin Cities and started connected with Alexander House in Blaine, and I worked there for many years, and then became involved in Day One, and then Day One became a program at Cornerstone, and so that's how I became part of the Cornerstone agency.
How long have you been at Cornerstone?
Almost 15 years.
Okay.
I look at Cheryl because we started at the same time.
And we're going to talk about Day One later in the program too. Meg, how about yourself?
So I became involved in this type of work in the early 80s. And I think often, as many people do, they did it as a volunteer back then because programs in the early 80s and of course late 70s were not as comprehensive as they are today. So I volunteered with one of the local shelter programs in the community that I was living down in St. Louis, Missouri, and from there actually took an internship as a student, and then after I'd finished my graduate degree, got involved as an employee within that shelter program, and then continued to work in various capacities within organizations with similar missions to Cornerstone. Yeah.
And you've obviously done wonderful work. You've received 2 awards. One is the Hannah Solomonson, and that's the National Council of Jewish Women Award for. Explain why you got that.
Well, actually both of them, and then the other one was the Champion of Change, and they were.
And that was a White House invitation.
It was. And really because there were a lot of great people that were working with me who were focused on doing some, I think, innovative things around looking at economic security issues for low-income women. As we know, while domestic violence, sexual violence cuts across all class lines, we do know that for low-income families, there are just significantly more barriers for them. And so some of the work that we were doing in the community in St. Louis at that time was really sort of on the cutting edge, and I happened to be a part of a really great organization that was doing that work, and so that's sort of how those rolled out. So it was a lot of fun. I did get to go to the White House, so that was interesting.
That was in 2011.
Right. Yep, that was a lot of fun.
Well, that's great. I mean, it's bad no matter who is a victim. But it is true that women are maybe professionals or have the ability to get a decent living. Wages are a little bit better off than those that had nothing, so to speak.
Right, absolutely.
We'll talk more about that
we will.
too. Okay, Cheryl, your turn.
I got started in working in this field about 25 years ago, and like a lot of people who are survivors, didn't identify what happened in my childhood and growing up years as being domestic abuse. And so coming into the field to do an internship for a master's degree really allowed me to look at that and explore that. And I relocated from Illinois 15 years ago and came to work with Cornerstone in a number of different programs. This whole field really began as a grassroots social movement, the battered women's movement. And Minnesota, I think especially, really has a very strong grassroots organization around the issue. And I think that it is very exciting to see some of what has been built up through the course of the years that this movement has been strong here in this state.
Yeah, and I think as a Minnesota resident, you can be proud of what we've done here. I mean, there's more to do. There's never enough, but we made some good.
Well, I always point out, actually, since we're on that subject, the feather in the cap for Minnesota. The first shelter program that came into existence has been identified in this state, and that is Women's Advocates in St. Paul. So that was in 1972. So you think about sort of the progression of the work has been significant over the years, and at that time very few programs had any access to state or federal funding. We're often operating on very shoestring budgets. And
It's, you know, and I'm sure every woman can kind of shudder at this. I mean, I don't know how women did it way back when. I mean, that's just kind of a statement, but it's thanks to the work of people like you, we're in a whole different world now.
Right. Well, and the founders, though. I was, you know, there are women here in the Bloomington community who have, you know, 2 to 3 women getting together and just deciding we need to do something about this issue. I do think that's really inspiring and important for us to remember as it relates to how this grassroots work began, as Cheryl was talking about.
Before we go into the history of Cornerstone a little bit, how many years have you been with? Because I know you came from St. Louis.
I'm from Minnesota, went down to St. Louis to finish grad school and ended up staying down there for a number of years, and then came back 4 years ago. So it has been wonderful. My parents are here in Minnesota and actually live here right here in Bloomington. So it was both this amazing organization with the breadth of work that's going on here, coupled with wanting to get back home, that brought me back 4 years ago.
Yeah. And I'm sure they're very happy too.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
So Cornerstone is around 30 years old. If any of you would like to speak, how it all started and what you've been up to.
Sure.
Just a little bit of history.
It was a small group of women and men that organized the work in Cornerstone, and really for many, many years, Cornerstone operated as a hotel-motel placement program, and that was really common in many communities. Most programs didn't actually own brick and mortar in terms of a building because that was a very costly thing, and again, there weren't really resources coming in to address this issue on any sort of significant basis. So Cornerstone for years had comprehensive work, but they were providing safe shelter to families and individuals within the hotel-motel program across Bloomington.
So they had like a voucher and people would go to for safe until they could kind of get on a little bit of stability to get on their own feet. Okay.
Exactly.
And then I think it was, when did you build your building?
Boy, 14 years ago now.
Yeah, something like
close
that.
to that, yeah, absolutely. And that certainly shifted a lot for the work in terms of being able to house more employees and have a base, and the building itself is allowed for a really purposely designed shelter program. So at its core, of course, which is where many programs began, is really that shelter emergency services part, and we operate that 35 beds within that building. They're individual units, so families can be together alone or combined with other families. There's space in our shelter that allows for a youth space, a teen room. We have early childhood space for individual counseling with women in advocacy and support. And then all of our lines, the crisis lines for folks coming into the shelter, would be operated out of that location as well. Yeah.
And in my mind, that building has a very special name. Somebody want to share what that name is?
I can talk about Sheila Wellstone.
Yes.
I worked with Sheila not only at Cornerstone, but Sheila and Paul were very involved with Day One, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and when I was at Alexander House. Sheila was always very special to me because when she did come to visit any of the shelters, no matter if it was in the metro area or southern Minnesota, northern Minnesota, her main intent was really to meet with the women and children and to hear from them what they needed. It was not about politics, it was about passion for the issue and how can we all work together to solve it. Sheila Wellstone, I think for many of us that have worked in the movement in Minnesota, held a very special place in our hearts.
And that's how the building ended
Yes.
up being called the Sheila Wellstone Building.
Yeah,
I felt that was special.
absolutely.
It
Just
is.
an
Yep.
incredibly special thing
Right.
to have. So, okay, do we want to start talking? And I guess we should probably start with, really probably the most fundamental mission maybe, and that's the emergency issues.
Yeah.
So, you're Day One, and that's the emergency line, is that correct? Or is it not?
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say, Maureen, one piece, it's interesting. Cornerstone's mission is about creating communities where individuals and families are safe and children thrive. We educate, advocate, and lead the way to social change. So that mission is incredibly broad
Yes.
and allows us to do a lot that ends violence in lots of capacities. And so domestic violence, sexual violence, trafficking, and general crime is actually a part of our work in our organization.
Right.
And I do think, and I said this a few moments ago, on some level, at the foundation is emergency services. Because while we don't, I think when we look at a vision for our future, we wish there was not a need for shelter, right? We wish violence was not in existence. But because it is, that's that first line. We need people to be able to access safety.
Yes.
Safety is the most important, both through accessing a line that allows them to speak to someone to help figure out what their needs are, and then having a safe place to go. So with that, that's my foundation to turning it to you.
So I think Meg's right that there are some fundamental pieces to our work. And what's also important that someone seeking help can access us in many different ways. The Day One Crisis Line is a statewide operated line by Cornerstone. And we also, not only can folks call in, they can also access through text and chat. Yes.
So we're,
Yeah.
Yes.
maybe it's my age, but you forget these other mechanisms.
That's
the
right.
phone isn't the only thing there anymore.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And so we operate that call center mostly out of our Minneapolis office. It is staffed by well-trained advocates. They are there to listen, help sort out different options, and really provide information about the breadth of services that are available at Cornerstone, as well as we work with 93 partner agencies around the state. It's important that the first time a victim survivor reaches out for help, that someone's there to listen. So somebody may call and know clearly they want emergency shelter. Others may call and just want somebody to listen and help them figure out what their next steps are. So that's what the crisis line is there for. Also, as Meg mentioned, we provide general crime services. So those type of services could be someone that has experienced auto theft. It could be that they had a family member that was murdered. It could be multiple crimes against another person. And so through the call center, not only do we do the Day 1 crisis line, but also the statewide general crime line. And we also have general crime services specific for this area as well.
Oh, that's that's a job. I mean, that's really covering everybody, and it's really covering the whole state.
Well, we've also found that there's a strong interconnection between general crime and other types of violence. So often a survivor who's experienced intimate partner violence may have also had her car broken into or, you know, been the victim of some other type of crime. So I think that it made a lot of sense for us to also engage in that work. And we also know that regardless of the type of crime someone experiences, there's trauma.
Yes.
And so all of our work really are focused on providing trauma-informed response, and it's central to the work.
And we're probably reaching people that, for one reason or another, don't have a lot of support system behind them. I mean, do you see that too? That some these, I mean, sometimes because of the victimization, the type of victimization, but some maybe they don't have siblings or parents or somebody to reach out for.
We're a very mobile society, and isolation being one of the dynamics and one of the abuse tactics used against people really does take away a support system that they might otherwise have. And so to be able to have that helpline number where they can call and talk to somebody who understands can in a lot of cases be a real lifeline.
And I just thought too, with the ability to chat and text, if they're too afraid to actually speak,
Yes.
that is a beginning, just to write a few sentences.
Yeah, I was shocked actually after we began providing those services, the numbers actually that are coming in to the call center from text and chat. They're high. You know, I think that confidentiality of it, that sort of protectedness, like you said, not having to have a voice-to-voice with someone sometimes is the way, and maybe,
Yeah.
And for some, the emotion might be so high they really can't even speak.
Right. And I think it provided us with a way that we could communicate with the deaf and hard of hearing because they, so they, that is the way they communicate is through text and chat. We also have immediate connection to interpreters for different spoken languages as well. So it's really being as accessible as we do with all our Cornerstone services to anyone at any point where they reach out for help.
Now, we cover the whole gamut here. We're not just talking about maybe a 30-year-old woman, are we? If you want to just cover the gamut, I mean, for people, I don't think people really stop and think. For number one, there is a male, small number maybe, but there is, and then we have LBG, BTG, I don't know if I get all of those, but you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
So if somebody wants to speak to that as well.
I can start?
Sure.
So yes, we really have a diversity on many different levels of folks that access our services, be it age, gender, race, how they identify. And again, that's part of being that trauma-informed services, that we make sure we're welcoming and accessible to anyone that reaches out. And so that diversity is embraced at Cornerstone, and again, to create that welcoming atmosphere.
And I was even thinking about across the lifespan.
Yes.
Right? So when we talk about, we've got a children, youth, and family program where we are specifically working with children and youth who may have witnessed domestic violence going on in the home. They may have been a primary target of that violence, but to have the services where they can be seeking that out so we're not repeating the same type of life issues, where they can get some healing, can get some understanding around it. But then you move into, your later adolescence, dating violence. In fact, February is
we're gonna
Dating
talk
Violence Awareness Month.
about that too.
Yes, so that's happening in ever greater numbers. Then you move through, people's 20s and 30s, but we're talking about abuse in later life that is happening. And I think that we may not as a society be prepared for the number of people who are going to be aging into older life. We're not going to have enough nursing home beds or assisted living places. People are going to be in their homes, are going to be having caretakers who are family members. And that is where more of the abuse takes place, is in the privacy of someone's home. So to be able to offer services that cross that lifespan, I think is really important too. When I think of the technology gains that we have made with the chat and text, that may be talking about the comfort level of somebody who is in their 20s or 30s who grew up with technology being a constant in their life. So we want to continue to evolve that way, but without forgetting about the fact that there are plenty of people out there for whom a more traditional method might work.
Well, and I even think, as people age, and spouses that were loving and careful and respectful, one or the other of them becomes a little bit, the brain becomes diseased or wears down. And all of a sudden you have a personality change, and you could, all of a sudden, either one of them finds out that they're a victim because of the disease process or the breakdown in the brain. Are we going to be seeing some of that, do you think?
I do think that we are. There are some cases where there is dementia-related violence, but I think a lot of times there's been control features that have been happening for a number of years, maybe around the finances, maybe around who you can see, where you can go, whether or not you have employment, and then you find that it escalates into some things that could become violent as a person ages. We actually have a specialized support group for persons who identify as a senior and who have or are experiencing domestic violence, because some of them have been in a relationship 30, 35, 40 years. And this might be the first time that they've had an opportunity to connect with other people around it, better understand it. And there's a lot of fears, am I going to age and be homeless? This is my source of income as I look at retirement and things like that. There are a lot of different things to consider with that particular population.
Yes.
And I think on the flip side with dementia, especially in cases of sexual assault, because it's harder to gather evidence and for people to believe older victims and survivors. So that's also an important part of our work, to understand that and be there and work through that.
Yeah, I mean, the almost crisis of the numbers of baby boomers might be
Yes.
a whole nother realm that
And
you guys...
I think we're going to see a lot more cases of financial abuse. This is the largest transfer of wealth from one generation to another as the baby boomers age. And you're going to see people who are exploiting that and maybe trying to get hold of that money for their own uses, things like that we don't often think about and connect to this particular issue.
And especially if the children, for example, have some other issue, like a drug problem or a gambling problem or any of that's going to all get in the mix too. Oh
Absolutely.
My goodness. Okay, well, let's talk about all of the advocacy you do. I mean, it just really starts with day one, and you're providing some very basic needs, and some of it's shelter.
Yeah, good shelter. And actually, a great segue, I know you were just mentioning, Cheryl, financial abuse, and I think that is a nice segue into talking about some of the work that we're uniquely doing in the community around economic security. So as we know, while, and we mentioned this, domestic violence cuts across all class lines, we know that to be true. There are tremendous barriers for those that are living in poverty, and so some of the work that we've done is to really figure out interventions that are going to help them move themselves forward, both in terms of economic security while at the same time trying to remain safe. So we have a program called Community and Economic Empowerment Programming, and within that program we provide transitional housing. So we have units of transitional housing here in Bloomington where someone can stay in our programming for up to 2 years. And during that time, we'll work with them around a lot of things that are really critical to moving forward. It may be looking at their credit. So are there things that we need to do around developing a credit action plan to increase their credit so that they would have more access to assets and moving forward? Renting an apartment once they leave our transitional housing. We provide assistance on matched savings accounts. So someone might, during that period of time that she's working with us or he's working with us, save for an asset, a home, a continued education, an automobile. Even though an automobile isn't necessarily an asset, it's something that in this community with very limited transportation, something that really folks need if they want to obtain employment or go back to school. So we allow them to save, and we'll match that money sometimes 3, 4, 5 to 1. And so once they've saved $1,500, we can match that money, and then they can use those funds to purchase that asset. And the whole thought around that is helping somebody become sort of pulling themselves up by the bootstraps and accumulating assets, which is what really all of us generally try to do. Middle America is trying to develop some assets in their life.
A minimum wage job's not going to really help them.
That's right.
If you can give them some education or
That's right.
convince them
Get
that
back to
they
school.
have job skills that they maybe didn't think they had.
That's right, yeah. We teach a financial literacy class. It's like many financial literacy classes out there. It covers a lot of basic core financial information, but one of the uniquenesses about it is that it incorporates information around safety. What are some of those things to pay attention to? Safety considerations throughout the curriculum. So for instance, if it's someone we're working with that's unbanked and we're talking about opening a savings account, where would you open that savings account? Is this someplace that would be safe for you? Where is your abuser? And having conversations around some of that. So those are things, Cheryl, that Cheryl for really the last number of years has been managing our economic empowerment work within the agency and really has developed that and I think is a unique aspect of our work right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, everything you said is we take for granted.
Yes, right.
But some of these situations.
Yeah.
One of the other pieces that I really want to mention, because it really involves our community, in particular our law enforcement and our justice system, is that in between the stability and the crisis, there's opportunities for intervention. So we work closely with cities, Bloomington, Richfield, with law enforcement, that when they make an arrest, that we can connect with the survivor immediately. And it's about being there not only for what their immediate needs are, but it's explaining the process, the criminal justice process, so they know their rights. They know how they can or cannot have to be involved. And it's really, like I say, bringing a community together to work on solving the issue.
Well, and I can imagine that the police are almost relieved, in a sense, to have people like you guys around there that they can turn to too. I mean,
Right. I
know,
think it is. It is a
it's
partnership.
obvious to them this person needs help,
Yes.
and they have you. I mean,
Right.
do you find that there's a close relationship, or at least a reasonably close relationship with the police departments in the cities that you serve?
Absolutely. In fact, we have a law enforcement committee. We have a number of law enforcement officers on our board of directors, and then we also have established 2 years ago, I think, a law enforcement committee, and we try to have representatives from law enforcement in each of the 10 cities that we're currently working, and really are looking at how do we all be more effective in our response? How do we as advocacy organization provide the best support when law enforcement engages us, and how does law enforcement get better at what they do? And our experience around working with law enforcement is that they've been really willing to step up to the table and figure out how to do all of this more collaboratively and really with the victim in mind.
Yeah, yeah. And then you have various support groups too. I mean, even I noticed one was called Season Support Group. Somebody want to talk about
Yes,
that? That got me.
That was the group that I mentioned earlier, that specialized group for women who identify as seniors. It's called Seasoned Survivors. We also have a number of educational groups and are looking at psych ed groups because we have a clinical services program. We do help a lot of people when it's the crisis and in addressing those initial needs that they have, but when somebody wants to work on that healing end of things, clinical services could be something that could really benefit them. That's looking at maybe root causes, root issues that a person is dealing with. It's very common and co-occurring depression and anxiety in people who have experienced domestic violence or sexual violence. So to be able to have that mental health component is really a benefit to the people that we serve.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. The whole issue of, I mean, if they weren't traumatized already, I mean, or had issues maybe in terms of mental health or stable family life or any of that, when they're in crisis, obviously it just blows up kind of. So you to really get them back to where they need to be, the clinical help is really important. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that at all? Or?
I think for people who are willing to do that type of exploration and work on the issues that they want to be able to work on, that can be a very supportive service for them. But even just offering groups in that context, right now we'll be starting up a trauma-informed yoga class in springtime, because people have a lot of different ways of healing. It's not just about being able to sit down and talk with someone. Trauma is experienced in a lot of different ways in the body. Trauma can actually impact how we process memories, how we store memories, even things like hypervigilance, different things like that. That's all connected to experiencing that trauma. So there isn't just one way that's going to work for everybody. So we want to offer different opportunities for people to seek out what will help them best in their healing process.
So yoga, that makes sense though.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
does.
you know, it's not something you would immediately think of, but when you think about it, it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Let's move into the youth area.
Yes.
I mean, because so many times it's not just a mom or a dad, it's the kids. So how do any of you can pick up on that and run with it and start talking
Well, I'll
about
talk a little bit about some of it. I'd already mentioned our Children, Youth, and Family program, but we also have school-based services, which is really, we've got relationships in both Bloomington and Richfield within the public school system to have advocacy presence in the schools, both to meet with individual students and to provide presentations, like through the health classes, on things like cyberbullying and dating violence, sexting, a number of different things that are happening nowadays. So we've got that presence, and that would be a program that we would actually call prevention. When we have somebody who has been identified and perhaps referred specifically for our services because there's been an awareness that there's violence in the household, or maybe they actually got involved in a fight with their boyfriend or girlfriend on campus, whatever that might look at, then we can do intervention programming there as well. We look at that as being those two sides, prevention and intervention, that we work within the schools. Our Children, Youth, and Family services tend to be broad. We've got some parenting support. We have, right now, the group that we are running for after school time is called Homework Help. Children also do not tend to work face-to-face with somebody who is a mentor or a counselor. They work side by side. So they need different ways to work. Maybe we're going to do an art project. Well, we get to build rapport and learn about one another. We have a sound studio. So maybe you're going to write a rap or some type of poetry, and we're going to lay that down as a track to music or to sound effects. So again, it's really finding out about that individual, meeting them where they're at, and helping them find some type of a service that fits their needs the best that it can.
And they feel the most comfortable in sharing,
Right.
which
Yes.
in the end allows them to share, and you can work then on the healing part.
Yes.
Is that
If I may add, also through our our prevention and education clinical program, we work closely with Safe Harbor. We have a community liaison that works with sexually exploited youth.
Yeah, let's talk about, back up a minute, what is Safe Harbor, just for those that might not know.
So Safe Harbor has been around now for several years, but it's really about decriminalizing youth that have maybe had in the past been picked up for prostitution or what we call survival sex. And it's about this wraparound service that instead of making them criminals, we offer them supportive services.
And that's the Safe Harbor bill, actually,
Yeah.
that it's 2-3 years old now, I think.
Yes. And so not only do we have an advocate that specifically works with them, also through day one, we work closely with Safe Harbor so that anybody around the state or concerned person can call the day one number and find out who specifically works with youth in their community around sexual exploitation.
Yeah, I mean, and some of those kids are so young.
Yeah, they are. And actually, within our school-based program, too, when you think about prevention, it is, of course, providing that response of education,
Right.
advocacy to the kids, but it is helping parents or teachers understand what are those flags, what are some of those things that would point me to either needing to get a referral for this youth or have more conversations with that youth. I know we've done a workshop on how to be an askable adult. So how do you
Yes.
create a space for a child to want to be able to come and speak to you? So what do you do around those things? So it's both the work with the kids, of course, is at its core, but working with parents and teachers and other providers as well.
Yes, as I was reading in your website, I noticed there was something on it about for parents. I think the category was for parents.
Yeah, right.
So you could see, I mean, I don't know if we want to just let some of our viewing audience know some of the flags that parents should be concerned about. Do you want to just enumerate them or list them?
Well, certainly if you have a child who is all of a sudden beginning to act differently, right? They've been getting good grades. Now all of a sudden they start to have some failing grades. Maybe you've had a pretty open relationship and you've been able to have access to their phone. Now that's being hidden from you. Passwords are being changed. I'll give you a for instance. You look at your child's phone and they have 2 calculator apps on there. Phones don't have 2 calculator apps, and right now there is a calculator app that's a fake, and it is letting people into, I don't know if they would call it the dark web or what, but into websites that you wouldn't necessarily want your parents to know about. So there would be a red flag. You look at your child's phone and you see 2 calculator apps on there now. So
And they could be withdrawn.
Yes.
They could be talking in a way not giving you enough information. Maybe they're in a new dating relationship and this person continually calls them, keeps track of where they're going, covering up any bruises, things like that. So there's multiple signs.
And I think aside from a child who might be exploited sexually, or it may be a child's in a relationship where there's just violence and
Right.
abuse, and has that child's friend base shifted? In the same way for an adult, has it become more isolating? You know, because some of those same characteristics that happen in adult relationships in terms of control, limiting where they can go, who they can talk with, when they can talk with someone, etc., are things that happen for youth and teens as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and it almost seems to me just, I mean, I'm at the grandparenting stage, but it seems that all of those are also flags for other things too, drug
Absolutely.
abuse,
Oh, sure.
gambling, anything, but I think parents in this day and age got to watch a little closer.
Right. Yeah. Well, and if parents do have questions, they can call our number. And I think that
Oh, that's something for parents to understand too, that
Absolutely.
you don't exist just for the victim.
that is right.
You exist for anybody who has some questions about potential victims.
That's
or-
right.
Well, and I would also mention a specialized program that we have for concerned persons on a quarterly basis. We offer information sessions for people who know or care about someone who is experiencing domestic or sexual violence, so that they can come and learn about the issues, but then also be able to vent a little bit of their own sense of powerlessness and things like that, and go back and be the best support person they can be. Because we know that if your family closes the door on being able to help you, you don't have a lot of other people you can turn to. In a lot of cases, you only have the person who's abusive in your life to turn back towards. So we want people to understand the process of leaving tends not to be one and done. It tends to be leaving multiple times before you stay away for good, because there's so many pieces that have to be put in place. The financial piece, maybe child care pieces, maybe employment pieces, maybe transportation pieces, whatever that looks like. But it can be very easy to lose patience with someone who returns to an abusive situation, and you want to say, if you go back again, we're not helping anymore. We don't want people to close that door. We want them to have a good understanding of the issues so that they can be the best support people possible for that victim.
Yes, I understand that. We can't just say, well, why don't you just leave?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
because that's actually one of the characteristics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important for those that might be experiencing some type of violence in their life to understand you don't have to be in that process of leaving to contact us. We're going to support you wherever you are. At that point, we understand that oftentimes there is a deep love and other connection to the person that's hurting you. So we're not here to tell you to leave or to do, call the
Anything, I mean-
police. We're here to listen and help.
And maybe give some suggestions for wherever the decisions.
Absolutely.
Options.
Yeah.
Safety planning can be done at any point along the way, staying safe. If you're making the decision to leave, whatever that looks like, we can meet a person where they're at and offer something, as kind of baseline as safety planning.
And in addition to where they're at, we can meet them in our agency, in our we have two other locations besides Bloomington. We have offices in Minneapolis, we have offices in Brooklyn Center, and we also will meet someone at Hardee's or wherever they need us to meet. Yeah, that's right, Starbucks. So if there is someone that is just wanting to talk and explore and figure out what they want, it really is from a place of what can we do to partner with you and support you in what way you would like. Yeah.
And I can even see that maybe because I'm an up to this, but if you could get them very, very early in the game, so to speak, then maybe you can provide some couples counseling or some therapy for the abuser and somehow prevent the total breakdown, and especially for the children's where they're witnessing violence. I mean, if you catch it soon enough. Is there any hope at all?
Well, I certainly always think there's hope, and every individual is experiencing different levels of lethality in that relationship. So I think that there are programs that work specifically with those that perpetrate violence, and I think we would encourage someone who is perpetrating or has been abusive in a relationship to access those programs and get individual help before they might move to something else like couples counseling or coming together like that. I think there's some separate support that's needed for both the victim and the perpetrator, and at some point when there are sort of safety measures in place, I think that coming together can happen. And I certainly have seen that happen, but it does take some work on behalf of the individual that has been violent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Definitely so. Now, I noticed on the website some mention of the KNOW abuse. is that what we've been talking about in terms of the school?
Yes.
Programming?
That is the curriculum that we use within the schools, and it would be small k, capital N-O, small w. So it's two things. First of all, let's get some education around abuse, but then let's also understand that this should lead to not having abuse.
I was just going to say, is there any data that comes back, or just anecdotal data from most of the time, I guess we have to say it's the males that are doing the abusing, but where it's like maybe a young man's, the light bulb goes up and he thought, I didn't realize I was doing that. I mean, is this kind of approach at the high school level showing some positive results? Is any of the data?
Well, if you're talking about our program specifically in terms of our educational program, it is hard in any type of educational intervention to sort of see a long-term impact, because we are in the school. We might see a kid for 3 classroom presentations. What we are looking at, though, Maureen, is just what has shifted in terms of their attitudes or beliefs or knowledge about issues, and we do see those shifts going. And I think that's a place to start. It's, here's what I thought supposed to be relationships between men and women or girls and boys, and then there's a shifting of understanding around that. So I do think that we know that connection to changing attitudes does help shift behavior further down the line, but we can't say our program specifically is ending violence by those questions. But it's a piece. It's a piece.
Knowledge is power. And one thing that I
that's right.
can say anecdotally is I am aware of several people who, when they had the need, even after high school, to seek out services like ours,
that's true.
they have come back and shared with us, I heard about this in high school. You all had people in our classes, so I knew where to come when I needed your help.
Right, absolutely.
And so there's more of a acceptance to come right away rather than wait until it gets really, really bad
Absolutely.
down the line.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
And I do think, knowledge, that was a great statement, knowledge is power. In addition to this broad array of sort of intervention services, we also do a lot of community work because, as I said, our mission is about education, work to social change. And how do you create social change? And it really is through providing knowledge to a lot of groups. And we have been available to speak to churches. We hold a biannual conference, regional conference, Midwestern conference that looks at interpersonal violence and abuse. And we really are, I think, trying to be thought leaders and experts around these things, that we can bring this to your group in the community, and hopefully that leads to some shifting as well.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Do you ever reach out to business? Because some of the harassment issues come through that. Do you speak, or are you invited to speak to business groups?
We are. We do have a number
Or
of
employees, I should say.
Yes.
Speak actually to the whole company.
Yes, we have a number of speakers on staff, so we can tailor things for anybody who would really like to request a speaker. So we go out to colleges, medical offices. Medical professionals are required to screen for
that's
domestic violence, but maybe they don't have referrals readily available. They don't have to be the experts on this, but you do have to have a referral that if somebody discloses, yes, that's what's happened to me. So.
And we also, through the Day One Crisis Line, we get a lot of calls both from workers and employers around harassment and stalking. So just know that's also available along with the community education piece.
Okay, there must be something we haven't covered. I want to make sure you
I know, for those folks who are 30 and under, we have a really tremendous Young Professionals Board. We established our Young Professionals Board about 3 years ago now, and they have taken off, and we have close to 30 folks that are members at the moment. And I think that what we really wanted to do was create a space for folks who might not have had board experience, meaning governing board experience, but they want to be able to gain some experience to be able to make themselves available to get onto governing boards, or they just want to network with other young folks who really care and are passionate about ending violence and abuse, and that's what we've done. So we'd love folks from the community who would like to get involved around our Young Professionals Board. They do things, they market, they create events where they can just talk about these issues. They've done some fundraising on behalf of the organization with wonderful events held at brew houses and places that they like to be. So I think that's a real important one. The other piece that we're starting this year, and this would be a call out to folks too, is a men's council. And the men's council is really going to be an entity that is focused on how do men become part of the solution. I mean, we certainly know that men can be victims. That really is true. But overwhelmingly, we need more male voices at the table to say, how do I change this? How do I become, supporting young boys around what it means to be a man and nonviolence and looking at some of those issues. So we're really looking for men who might want to get involved in the Men's Council this year as well.
Yeah, because that's one issue I was going to bring up. What really drives this whole thing? What is the cause of domestic violence? Because if you can get a handle on the cause, maybe you can do something to fix it. Do we have any data or just what? I mean, you have not a lot of knowledge, many years of knowledge here. What really seems to be causing this kind of behavior? Is it?
I'll start.
It's a big question.
It is a big question, and I love it. It is a number of factors, but certainly at its root is looking at our culture and what's around us. What supports power in relationships, and generally power with men in relationships. So I think that it's the abuse of power. It's about control, and how does someone abusively use their power in that relationship to control someone else. And we have lots of institutions out there that support an imbalance around power. But beyond that, we also know there are other complicating factors. I mean, we know that individuals who grow up in a home where they witnessed violence and abuse may have increased likelihood or more vulnerable to perhaps using violence and abuse in their relationship. Not all the time. And we wouldn't want to make a broad sweep that, all boys that witness violence grow up and become abusive. That certainly is not the case. We know that there are mental health issues that sometimes are involved. We know there are sometimes chemical dependency issues that are involved. That doesn't mean that chemical dependency causes violence. It can escalate it. It can increase likelihood, increase vulnerability. So I think all of those things can be intertwined around the why. But I would say at its foundation, we need to look at culture. I mean, when you think about law enforcement, historically, when there was violence in the home and a law enforcement officer came to the home, the intervention was take a walk around the block. It wasn't thought of as a crime in any way. It was sort of, the man's the king of the castle, and we're not going to remove someone from their home. And some of that philosophically has changed over the years. So I think that that's just one example of how cultural shifts have happened, and we're looking at institutions to operate differently than they have.
Yeah, and when a man thinks that it's man to rule the castle, like you said, I mean, that's all he's heard. Men make the financial decisions, men do this, men do that. Then, and if he feels he's not measuring up, he might get frustrated enough or angry at himself more that he takes it out on another person. And it's almost, even religion can play a role in that too, with the old patriarchal traditions. And do you see some of that as kind of a little more of a reason why somebody wants to control so bad?
Well, we certainly do. We do outreach to faith communities and things like that, because a person can use, whether it be scripture or something from the Quran or the Torah, right, to support abusive behavior. Depends on the interpretation that you're going to use. But we would really like for faith communities to be able to have a helping response. Again, know those resources and referrals. Don't tell somebody this is your cross to bear or whatever it is. Understand that there are agencies out there that can help people and be able to provide those referrals. One of the regular resources that I use is Faith Trust Institute. They've got wonderful resources for those 3 major faith groupings that people could access and get videos and different things like that from it. But I would also, and I'm going to mention this as a correlative factor as opposed to a causative factor, we know that there is a correlation between poverty and even homelessness and experiencing domestic violence. And it isn't that you are more apt to be violent when you are poor, it's that there are greater stressors
Well, that's
in
what
your
I was
life.
trying to get
Yes,
at, is the stressors.
there are stressors that can cause there to be an increase in escalation and maybe in frequency of something happening, because life is such a struggle with that. It's one of the reasons why we came up with the focused program around economics. 99% of women who've experienced physical domestic violence in their relationships indicated experiencing financial abuse. And so we understand those correlations between those things, and we want to be able to address them.
So hopefully by getting the kids in high school, both male and female, and talking about these issues, that maybe everybody's talking rather than acting out. Is that something to...
Our community plays the most valuable role in our work. We know from victims and survivors how they hear about us is from somebody in the community, from a family member, from another survivor. So the work we can do together is so valuable in making change.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And just keep supporting each other.
that's right.
That's, if there's an open ear and a friendly smile,
Yeah.
maybe they'll open up. Well, this has just been marvelous. Again, it went so fast, like my programs usually do. So I really want to thank you all. And again, Cornerstone is such a wonderful agency for anybody out there. They've got a wonderful website. If you have any questions of all, that's a good place to start. Do you want to, Carolyn, Colleen, do you want to just give the number for day one?
Right. So the number from day one is 1-866-223-1111, and then the Cornerstone website is cornerstonemn.org.
Okay.
And I would just want to add, if there are any survivors listening, just they know it's not their fault. They don't deserve the abuse, and there is help available, and calling that number would be a first start.
Okay. Well, again, thank Colleen Smith, Meg Schnabel, and Cheryl Unaton. Colbo Unaton, excuse me. Again, thank you so much for being on the program with me. This has
Delightful.
truly
Thank
been
you,
a
Maureen.
Thank you for
marvelous.
having us,
And
Maureen.
if one person helps one person, it's well worth it.
Absolutely.
And to my audience, good night.